Okay, so have you ever noticed how sometimes your mind just seems to have a life of its own? Like it's off on some crazy tangent, replaying that awkward thing you said 5 years ago, or suddenly convinced that your whole life's about to implode because of like one missed deadline.
Oh, absolutely. That internal chatter, it's part of being human, right?
Yeah.
But when it turns into this nonstop loop of worry and obsessing over things, well, that's when it starts to really wear you down.
It totally does. And that's what we're going to dig into today. We've been exploring this idea of overthinking, and we found some really insightful stuff on the Buddha Motivation YouTube channel, specifically their video on 6 Buddhist teachings to stop overthinking and find inner peace. So we're going to take a deep dive into these teachings and see how they can help us, maybe loosen the grip of all that mental noise and find a bit more calm.
I think that's a fantastic idea, because what's great about this video is that it doesn't just present these teachings as some abstract philosophy. It actually breaks them down into practical steps, almost like tools we can use to retrain our minds.
Yeah, exactly. Tools for a calmer mind. I love that. So let's jump right in. The first teaching is all about being present. The past is gone. The future is uncertain. Focus on the present moment. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But my brain seems to have this default setting of either reliving past embarrassments or freaking out about potential future disasters.
Yeah, I think that's a really common experience. Our minds are kind of wired to dwell on what's already happened and try to predict what's coming next.
Yeah.
But this teaching is all about recognizing that the past is, well, it's done. We can't change it. And the future, it's not even here yet. The only place where we truly have any power, where we actually live our lives, is in this present moment.
And the video quotes the Buddha on this, saying, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." There's something so direct and powerful about that. It really forces you to stop and consider where your mental energy is actually going,
It really does. Because when we're stuck in those loops of regretting the past or worrying about the future, we're essentially missing out on what's happening right here, right now. The video emphasizes this crucial point. The present moment is the only reality we truly have. Everything else is just a memory or a projection.
It's like I can spend hours mentally replaying some argument I had last week, but it doesn't actually change the fact that it happened. And all that mental energy is just distracting me from what's happening in my life right now.
Absolutely. And a lot of overthinking comes from this desire to control things, to wish things had been different in the past, or to try and guarantee certain outcomes in the future. But by consciously shifting our attention to the present, we start to let go of that need to control things that are either already gone or haven't even happened yet.
The video uses this really helpful analogy of a monk and his disciple crossing a river. The monk just, steps right in and starts crossing while the disciple is all anxious and hesitant, worrying about the potential dangers.
Right, and I think what's so insightful about that story is that it shows us the difference between being fully present and being caught up in our thoughts. The monk isn't weighed down by past river crossings or worried about future ones. He's just focused on navigating this one. And it's the disciple's fear, fueled by all those what-if scenarios, that creates his struggle.
Exactly. It's like all that dwelling on past mistakes or future anxieties is literally keeping us stuck on the riverbank, preventing us from actually moving forward in our lives. Being present is the only way to take that next step, whatever it may be.
So that's about being present. The second teaching shifts the focus to our thoughts themselves. Thoughts are like clouds. Let them pass without clinging to them. It's about seeing our thoughts in a whole new light.
Oh, I find this one so freeing. It's like, just because a thought pops into my head doesn't mean I have to believe it or get all caught up in it, right?
Exactly. The video quotes this idea, with our thoughts, we make the world. And the key takeaway here is to understand that while our thoughts definitely influence how we see things, they aren't necessarily the absolute truth. We can actually learn to observe our thoughts without becoming totally enmeshed in them. They're fleeting, transient, like the teaching says.
It's like watching clouds drift across the sky. Some are fluffy and white, some are dark and stormy, but they all eventually move on. We don't try to grab onto a rain cloud and hold it there, right?
Exactly. The video uses a similar analogy of a river and leaves floating on the surface. We just watch them drift by. We don't jump in and try to catch every single one. Our thoughts are kind of like that, a constant stream. And when we stop trying to grasp onto each and every thought, we free ourselves from being pulled around by them.
You know, it's interesting because in our society, there's almost this pressure to be constantly thinking, to be mentally productive. But maybe all that busyness is actually just creating more noise, more distraction.
That's a really important point. And this teaching connects to another quote from the video. Our life is shaped by our mind, for we become what we think. So if we can learn to let go of those negative or overly busy thoughts, we're actually creating space for a calmer, more positive state of mind.
Right. It's like clearing out the mental clutter. So the third teaching tackles a pretty big issue. Overthinking creates suffering. Let go of what you can't control. And I think this is where things get really real for a lot of people.
It does, because the video directly links our habit of overthinking with increased stress and unhappiness. We get caught in these cycles of endlessly analyzing everything, worrying about things that might happen and trying to force outcomes that are beyond our control.
And there's this quote that I think really captures the essence of this teaching. Suffering is not caused by the events in our lives, but by our reaction to them. That's a huge perspective shift, isn't it?
It is. It's saying that our suffering isn't solely determined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond to those events. And often, that response involves a whole lot of overthinking, which just amplifies even small problems into big sources of stress.
It's like, it's not the flat tire itself that ruins your day, right? It's the hours you spend afterwards replaying every decision that might have led to that flat tire and worrying about being late for everything else.
Precisely. And the video really emphasizes how pointless it is to try and control things that are simply uncontrollable. It's like trying to push a boulder uphill. You just end up exhausted and frustrated.
That's such a good analogy. And speaking of pushing boulders uphill, the video actually mentions that story of the person trying to do just that, often attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh. It feels like we've all been in that situation at some point.
We have. It's the perfect metaphor for how much energy we waste trying to control the uncontrollable through overthinking. The story reminds us that sometimes the wisest and most empowering thing we can do is just stop pushing, to accept the reality of the situation and focus our energy on the things we can actually influence. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about being strategic with our mental resources.
So the fourth teaching gives us a practical technique to help us shift our focus. Practice mindfulness. Anchor yourself in your breath to quiet the mind. Mindfulness is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it really mean in this context?
In this teaching, mindfulness is about cultivating the state of present moment awareness. Paying attention to what's happening right now, both inside us, our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and outside us, in our environment, without judgment, just observing.
And the breath is presented as this anchor to the present, something we can always turn to when our thoughts are spiraling.
Right. The video explains that when we feel ourselves getting swept away by a torrent of thoughts, we can redirect our attention to the simple act of breathing, feeling the rise and fall of our chest, the air moving in and out of our nostrils. It's incredibly grounding, bringing us back to the present moment and creating a bit of space between us and all that mental noise.
And there are two quotes here that really illustrate this. First, when the mind is calm, the breath is calm. It's like there's this beautiful connection between our mental and physical state, right?
There is. And it works both ways. Just as a calm mind can lead to calmer breathing, consciously regulating our breath can also calm our mind. It's a powerful feedback loop we can learn to use to our advantage.
And the second quote is, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." That really highlights the power of where we choose to direct our attention.
Right. By training our minds through mindfulness and breath awareness, we're essentially shaping our inner world. We're making it a place that's less susceptible to the chaos of overthinking.
Okay, so the fifth teaching takes a slightly different approach. Simplicity is freedom. Stop complicating life with unnecessary worries. It's all about decluttering, both externally and internally.
Absolutely. The video suggests that a lot of our anxiety and overthinking comes from the complexity of modern life and from our own tendency to add extra layers of worry and complication to things. So, by consciously embracing simplicity, we can let go of a lot of that mental baggage.
And it brings in this beautiful quote from the Dhammapada. "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." I find that incredibly profound. It's saying that happiness isn't some far-off goal we have to stress and strive for, but something we can find in the present moment, in the simple act of living.
Exactly. And so much of our overthinking is about chasing after some idealized future state of happiness. This teaching encourages us to recognize the potential for joy and contentment right here, right now, in the simplicity of our everyday experiences.
The video also introduces this Zen concept of shabumi, which it describes as the beauty of simplicity. And there's this quote from a Zen master: "The simpler the life, the more profound the meaning." It's this idea that there's a deep connection between external simplicity and inner depth.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't come across Shibumi before, it's about finding elegance and meaning in things that are uncluttered and straightforward, not overly adorned or complex. It's about stripping away the excess to reveal the essence.
Exactly. And by reducing the noise and clutter in our lives, both externally and in our minds, we can create space to connect with a deeper sense of purpose and meaning. And finally, the sixth teaching offers a perspective that I find really comforting, especially when I'm feeling trapped in a cycle of overthinking. Trust in impermanence. Nothing lasts forever, not even your struggles.
This one's all about anicca, the Buddhist principle of impermanence. The video reminds us that everything is in constant flux, including our thoughts and emotions. They're not fixed, they're always changing, arising, and passing away.
And there's a quote here from the Buddha: "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." That last part is important, isn't it? It's not just about passively waiting for things to change, but actively engaging with the present moment while understanding that change is inevitable.
It is, because while we can find comfort in knowing that difficult times and negative thought patterns will eventually pass, that doesn't mean we just sit back and do nothing. It's about continuing to practice, to cultivate wisdom and compassion, knowing that everything is in a constant state of transformation.
The video also highlights this really interesting link between the fear of permanence and overthinking. It's like we often get caught in these spirals of worry because we're afraid that a current problem or negative feeling will last forever.
Exactly. And when we recognize the fundamental truth of impermanence, it allows us to loosen our grip on those worries, knowing that situations will evolve, that even intense overthinking will eventually subside, can bring a sense of relief and make the mental struggle a bit easier to bear.
So looking back at all six teachings, they really provide a pretty comprehensive framework for understanding and working with overthinking. It's about shifting our focus to the present moment, learning to observe our thoughts without getting swept away by them, recognizing the connection between overthinking and suffering, cultivating mindfulness through our breath, embracing simplicity, and trusting in the natural flow of change.
Absolutely. And the video emphasizes that these aren't just abstract ideas, they're practical guidelines we can begin integrating into our daily lives to cultivate more calmness and mental clarity. It's a process of training our minds, and it takes time and effort.
I think it's a really interesting invitation to reflect on which of these teachings resonates most strongly with you right now. Maybe it's the idea of focusing on your breath, or perhaps it's the reminder that whatever you're struggling with won't last forever. There's a lot here to think about as we navigate the constant flow of our thoughts and try to find a little more peace of mind.
I think that's beautifully said. It's about finding those tools and practices that help us cultivate a gentler, more peaceful relationship with our own minds.
Absolutely.